Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart, distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and international football, all from the perspective of a couple of Americans. This week featured two matches, both against Crystal Palace, at home in the EFL or Carabao Cup, and away in the Premier League. How you doing, Keith?
Hello, Dove. My settings are a bit different this week. I'm at my parents for the holidays, so
Yep.
that's nice most
Traveling,
of the
traveling
time.
for the festive fixtures.
Yeah, that's nice and most of the times. This setup is a little more awkward than usual, but it's fine. And you can't see my face, but let's be honest, that's for the best.
Yeah, we are not intentionally anonymizing you to protect your
Yeah.
identity this week.
Yes. Again, there's no halo effect going on. There's just one single light in this room that I'm using, and it is directly above my head, and so this is what we get. But
That's fine.
but we soldier
Uh,
on.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, one thing I wanted to mention that was kind of funny last week, I didn't really think about too much in the moment, but listening back, it's interesting noting the differences in the competition format of the Premier League and just differences between other sports and other leagues that I'm aware of that I've seen in other contexts. So one thing is, and we'll see this sometimes, where there's a team like, I don't want to pick on any example from recent memory because there isn't one that I can think of, but a team that maybe isn't the best, maybe isn't in the top half even of the table, but they give you a run for their money or for your money, and you never know. The teams are generally of a good quality. It's always a decent contest. Of course, we won 5-1 yesterday, but you don't go into it, you don't know what to expect. And it was interesting that another mechanism I hadn't really considered for that until you mentioned it last week was the number of matches in a team's schedule, and how basically the better teams in the position Arsenal's been in the last few years, as I've been watching them, for instance, we will be in the cup competitions, and this year actually go longer in them. We didn't really the last couple of years, but this year we're advancing the Carabao Cup. Hopefully we do well in the FA Cup also. We've seen this with Manchester City, like when they've won the treble or at least advanced along in those competitions. You also qualify for European play. Those are things that a team like whatever it was,
It was
Nottingham
it
Forest
was Everton. We can
or
we can
Everton,
dispense
right?
with it. It was Everton that
Yeah,
we're talking about.
that they don't, and so they also happen to miss a fixture because of severe weather. But it's interesting as a leveling aspect between the clubs at the top of the table regularly and the ones that are at the bottom, that they just will naturally have fewer games. It's one way. Of course, there's other leveling mechanisms also. They don't have the money to be able to afford better players, so they lose out on that. But it's interesting though that with fewer fixtures, they can be more rested and be able to at least have that advantage.
Yeah, and that's the big thing there with as you get to the bigger clubs is that question of depth, right? And we'll sort of see that this week where Arsenal is rotating players in and out of the lineup, and across the two games we had a pretty good lineup both times. Sort of. Obviously, injuries are a part of that and what we've been dealing with and whatnot. But yeah, that's just kind of we've talked about that as kind of the price you pay for the kind of success we've had. Is it means you get to play more games. On the other hand, you get all these extra games where you get more money, and you use
Right.
that money to buy players.
Right. Money, which can be exchanged for goods and
Goods and
services.
services, exactly. It's exactly right. And so, yeah, and this is more the case, I think, in the Premier League, where the depth of the league is so much stronger. The money's so much bigger. Um, Even mid and lower table clubs can purchase really quality players. And so, in some ways, there's a lot more depth to the Premier League than you'll see certainly even some of the bigger continental leagues, and certainly as you go down the table at the European table, so to speak. You start looking at the leagues like Portugal or the Netherlands that are dominated by one, two, three clubs.
Mm,
Much of their competition week in and week out is there's a huge gap, much bigger than the gap between Arsenal and say Wolves. And thinking of a team at the bottom of the table, or Everton, as we saw.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting to note. So as of right now, the NCAA College Cup has come to a close, right, for the men's
Mhm.
competition. So how did that end up turning out?
Right. Actually, I ended up catching the end of that. So you should know is that American men's college soccer, well, American college soccer, the women do this too, is played a little bit differently. The clock counts down like a traditional, more like a traditional American sport.
Right.
And if they are tied after 90 minutes, they will play two 10-minute overtimes that are sudden death, or golden goal, as it's known
Okay,
in other
so
parts of the world.
up to 2 of those. So the first one is sudden death. They'll have the second one if there's still a draw.
Correct. And at that
Okay.
point, if they've gone 100, if they've gone the I guess that's 110 minutes. If they've gone the whole time without a goal, then they'll go to a shootout.
Okay.
But this is just to set up to point out that there was a golden goal that won the College Cup, which was very exciting. And it was the University of Vermont.
Hmm.
Shockingly won. Shockingly, not in so much in the context of the game itself, but certainly shockingly in the context of the season in the world of college soccer. Vermont,
Mhm.
which has been a quality program in the last few years, to not only get to the College Cup, but then to win the whole darn thing. It was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
congratulations, Catamounts.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting. It's again, it's one of those things where there's a level-ish playing field. Anybody has a shot in a tournament like that. So that's yeah, good for them. Speaking of tournaments and cup competitions, now that the quarterfinal round is over, the Carabao Cup, who did we draw for the semifinal round?
Right. So, of course, spoiler alert, we won the quarterfinal game this week against Palace to advance. The semifinal draw was held on Thursday at the end of the Spurs United game, the last of the games. We drew Newcastle. Those games will be played midweek in the first week of January and then the first week of February. It's a two-leg semifinal for this competition, remember.
Oh, okay,
So
right.
it's going. The first leg is going to be at the Emirates, and then the second leg will be up at St James's Park.
Hmm.
Um, Again, much like
That's
with Europe, aggregate goals, total goals,
right.
and I don't recall. I know in this round, in the quarters, I believe they would have gone straight to shootout if we had been level. I don't know what they'll do in the semifinals because of the two legs. I guess we'll find out, or rather, I hope we don't have to find out. But
Yeah, really.
just in case, something to be aware of at that stage.
Right.
The other semifinal will be Spurs and Liverpool. And all things considered, this is probably the best matchup we could have hoped for. Not so much that, I mean, Newcastle is, at least on the course of the season, better than Spurs. Not nearly as good as Liverpool, but Newcastle is definitely going to play a slower game. Spurs and Liverpool are both going to, go, 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 as we've seen. And at this point of the season, as we start talking about fixture congestion, right? More games,
Mhm.
more games, more games. Having these two extra games not be end to end action might be a little bit helpful. On the other hand,
Right.
we also know Newcastle is going to be a physical side, which could take a bit out of us in that way. So we'll see what
Mhm.
happens. I guess the only thing I was saying going into the draws, I didn't want Liverpool, not because I'm afraid of Liverpool. I think we can beat them. I think we can beat anybody in over two legs. But I guess I'd rather only play Liverpool once, and
Yeah.
then regardless of the outcome, I just rather not have two of those games. And I know Spurs North London derby obviously has a little bit as well, but given the choice of the three possible choices, I would have picked Newcastle. Absolutely capable of dropping these games. This is not a comment on we're gonna win this one, but I do feel
Right.
pretty good. And we've only ever won the League Cup twice, so to
Yeah.
to go through and have a shot at it right now is kind of exciting. I know it's the fourth tier competition. I know it's the fourth one we care about, but
Yeah.
we're in it, and I'd rather win it than not.
Well, yeah, and it is a little early to be talking in this manner, but things aren't going as we had necessarily hoped for in the Premier League. So whatever we can get outside the Premier League is welcome. So yeah, let's hope we do well. It's a little disappointing if we're playing at home first and it does turn out that it's going to go to penalties at some point. Like hopefully we don't, but it's like that is ultimately it's going to end in penalties if there's a draw either at
Well, yes,
regulation time or after like extra
yeah,
time
right. The question was, would they have extra time? And that the
first,
short
right?
the
So
short
it's
answer is I don't remember.
right, and it's unfortunate should it go to penalties that won't be at home. That'd be a nice little
Yeah,
small advantage if it could work out that way, but oh well.
Yeah, I mean, the other way to look at that is, we have struggled up at Newcastle, but they have struggled mightily at the Emirates. I mean, the real answer is what do? We pound them at home, and then if you go into the second leg up 3 goals,
Right.
that's a really good place to, obviously it's a
Ah,
really good
good
place to
point.
be.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I could see that as an advantage instead. Yeah, that's true. And in other cup competition news, there's some scheduling for the Leagues Cup in MLS, right?
Well, really the whole MLS. So
Okay.
the schedule was released for the 2025 season earlier this week. So that's now available. Go check it out. See what games are on in your area, or rather available to go watch in your area. They're all on Apple, as you know.
Yeah.
Um, they also had this is since the previous season ended, now we're gearing up for the next one. They had just earlier this week, maybe Thursday, was the MLS expand or not the was the MLS draft, drafting collegiate players, which
Oh, okay.
it's a very American thing. Picking the guys and taking most of the guys who were picked are going to wind up being in the developmental teams for these clubs.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a cool thing for them to be able to say. The other thing that happened was an expansion draft. The 30th MLS team is going to start next year. That's San
Hmm.
Diego FC,
Oh,
owner of
okay.
the what has to be the most generic crest I've ever seen. It's bad, man.
Huh.
I'll give you a little link to the picture.
Yeah. I'm
It
looking it
is a
up now.
choice.
Yeah.
It is a choice.
Yeah.
Or
It's
rather, I
a
should say maybe it's. I guess we should say it's not really much of a choice at all,
it's a
actually.
lack of choice. Yeah.
Yeah, for a city like
Designed by
San Diego,
committee.
for a city like San Diego, which is an interesting city with a lot going for it. Yeah, that that could have been something else. Anyway, they're coming in. They had an expansion draft. We had an opportunity to pick some players from a few MLS teams. So that stuff all happened this week. Um, what did they pick up? There was a name. They've made a couple of signings as well. The big one was Irving Chiqui Lozano, Mexican international, who will join from PSV in the Netherlands.
Hmm.
So yeah, we'll see what the 30th MLS team does.
Yeah. You actually just reminded me talking about Mexican soccer players. You reminded me of Danny Rojas.
Mm.
Anybody watching this, probably anybody watching this with kids, realistically, who is interested in seeing the new Sonic 3 movie that just came out this weekend, we'll see Danny Rojas in a pretty, the actor who played him, I should say, in a pretty funny role. Very minor cameo for him, but a very funny role in Sonic 3. So something to look out for.
Yeah, football is life. But also the other thing that came out, so there isn't anything official on this. But there are likely going to be some changes to the Leagues Cup. So the last 2 years, the Leagues Cup has been a break in the season. This group and knockout stage tournament involving the MLS and Liga MX. There's going to be some changes. They're trying to adjust it such that there are more MLS Liga MX games as
Hmm.
opposed to, like, I'm thinking about it from New York City's perspective. I think they've played in the 2 years. I think they've played maybe two Mexican teams,
Hmm.
and that's like it's been a very MLS heavy. Partly just because there were more MLS teams than there are Liga MX teams. Um,
So
but
are they looking at doing it more like the EFL Cup or the Carabao Cup or something where the matches are spread out over a longer period or something?
something I think what they're talking about is something resembling a little bit more of what we see with the European continental competition. So midweek games
Oh,
mixed
okay.
in with the MLS and Liga MX schedule, as
Oh,
opposed
interesting.
to like stopping for a month and just doing this for a while.
Right. Oh,
Um,
cool. Okay.
we'll sort of see what comes from that. There is also I haven't talked about this for a while because I haven't really been sure. We've had other things to talk about, but there is an ongoing rumor that MLS is strongly considering switching its calendar to the European model, the fall to
Huh.
spring, sort of August to May model, as opposed to what we're doing, which is the single calendar year,
Right.
February to December. So the rumor is that they would make the switch after the World Cup. So they would stop for I think what they would say was they play the 25 season as normal, and then for the first half of 26 they do just some sort of tournament, just to a small tournament just to keep things going.
Right.
They would break for the World Cup, being in the U.S. And Mexico and
Yeah.
Canada,
Yeah.
and then come back afterwards at the end of the summer and start the season with, they said, like a 3 or 4 week break in the middle of the winter, which
Huh.
mimics a thing you see in Germany and other basically every European country except England, who says let's do more games.
Yeah.
Um, Again, that's a rumor, but it's being said in far too many places for me to think that this is, oh, it's just some crazy idea. I think it's something that's being considered. No idea where it's going to go, but we'll see.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. We'll keep everyone updated as more emerges on that. Yeah, that'll be something to see. All right. Well, time to talk about the week's matches. The week's Crystal Palace matches.
Hmm.
So the first one was on Wednesday. This was December 18th. This is the quarterfinal round of the EFL/Carabao Cup, and we ended up edging them out 3-2. It felt like it probably should have been 3-1. Eddie Nketiah had a really, really incredible header to draw them closer to level, but
Hmm.
not quite. Um, but yeah, it was fun. We got to see Kieran Tierney for the first time in a long time. I noticed with these particular kits for this season that are really meant to the blue accents are meant to seamlessly kind of transition from the shirts to the shorts. He didn't tuck his shirt in, so that's a change for him.
Yeah, a lot of things are changing with Tierney. He's playing, which is a good change.
That's the biggest one.
Yeah, they did it. There was an announcement or a story, not an announcement, but a story after the game that Arsenal will not be renewing his contract. So starting in January, he can sign a free contract, which is
Ah,
basically he can agree that when the next season starts, he'll go join whatever that team
right.
is. So
Oh,
this
interesting.
will,
Okay.
whatever we get out of Tierney is probably going to be the last we see of Tierney. There's a good chance it will be the last time we see Kieran Tierney in an Arsenal shirt, which we, to
Huh.
be fair, it's not the first time we've said that. But
Yeah. Um, Also, I noticed for this match, no VAR. I guess I don't know if that does that start at the semifinal round or the final round. I think they did mention that there would be VAR before the competition is over, but
Yeah, that was an interesting one. My suspicion is that they because with VAR, I guess they feel like, and this must be true in the FA Cup as well, because they feel like they can't get it into every game in the competition. They don't want to have it. And the
hmm
League Cup has traditionally been a ground for lower level sides or lower tier Premier League sides even to advance and go
right.
deep in a competition and get those extra games and maybe even win a trophy. Um, that has long since changed. Of course, you're looking at the final four again: Arsenal, Liverpool, Newcastle, Spurs. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not really very. That's not that unusual, to be honest.
right.
And so I mean, and Spurs, for example, beat City and United to get here. So like, there's a pretty good chance it could have been one of them, if not Tottenham. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah, I suspect it's related to that. But yeah, apparently it's going to be back for the semifinal, and the final would make sense being at Wembley. That the stadium's all tricked out, so that's not going to be an issue.
yeah. I have to say, I mean, it's notable that there was no VAR, but I'm not really complaining. I felt like the game went totally fine without it.
Yeah, I mean, there was only one instance where VAR really could have come into play, but
Which are you thinking of? Yeah.
the Jesus, I think it was his second goal. He was offside.
Oh, I know what you mean.
He
Right.
was offside. Let's not sugarcoat this. He was
Well, yeah,
offside. That shouldn't have counted.
by a little bit. Like it
Yeah,
was one of those things where, as we were talking about before, like he did try to time his run. It wasn't like he was trying to position himself ahead of everybody
oh
else.
yeah,
He was just a little bit. It was like his shoulder. It was
oh
like
yeah,
not
but
like his whole body or anything. But
yeah,
yeah,
but real instances of actual cherry picking are not something you really see in the game anymore. I
right.
mean, almost all the offside is going to be either that mistimed run, you're just off, or in a lot of cases it's you were just being careless and not paying. But like rarely,
No,
that kind of
yeah.
cherry picking is the kind of thing you see with like your son's age. Those kids who are
Oh,
like,
oh,
oh, I'm just
I
gonna.
have literally seen that. I think I may have even talked about it on the show. The one kid who was literally standing in front of the goal, waiting for the ball to be passed to him so he could tap it in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why that rule
Right.
exists. Um, but of course, at the professional level, for a lot of because of the way the game is officiated and all that, and because the rule exists, you don't see that. But in this instance,
Yep. But yeah, so okay, so good point. So I guess the one thing that we may have been wishing for VAR for, we weren't wishing for because it
yeah,
worked out in our favor.
right. I mean, I think looking at this early on. Well, let's not sugarcoat coat this. The big story of the game, of course, is Gabriel Jesus. Which, oh look, Christmas is next week, and there's Jesus just doing good things. Go figure, right? Yeah, Gabriel Jesus with a hat trick. That was fun. That was fun.
Yeah.
Yes, one of his goals was offside, but we're not going to review that stuff. Then okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it was great to see him. We talked about this last week, right? How he was cutting closer. He was getting closer. The Champions League game. He didn't convert any of those chances, but he's taking them. And for them to finally go in, I mean, you saw like the look on his face after the first goal. I mean,
Mhm.
who needed that?
Mhm. And then yeah, the dam broke basically.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, it was great, and not just the first half looked pretty much like he has been playing before that point, with a bunch of chances, just not quite making it, not connecting on them. But yeah, and Sterling frustrated me a little bit in the first half. Like he had some good chances that he also just wasn't able to really make anything out of too.
Yeah, Sterling's an interesting player because, of course, there is a sense that he was almost a bit of a panic buy. Like we needed somebody to play out in the forward position,
Yeah.
and because so many of the other deals fell through or weren't going to come to fruition, they just grabbed Raheem Sterling because he was basically for nothing.
Mhm.
Um, and there's definitely a sense. I mean, we've talked about he has a long history. He's played a lot of games in the Premier League at the top level. He's won trophies, but there's also a sense that maybe he just doesn't have anything anymore. Um, which is kind of weird to say about a guy who's 30, but
Mhm.
or roughly thereabouts.
Mhm.
Um, especially given we just talked about what 40-year-old Ashley Young we saw last week.
Yeah.
Um,
39, 39.
39, yeah. But you're right, that idea of a player who is a sense like that, but how much of that is he really just doesn't have it anymore, and how much of it is just like where's he gonna play? I mean, he only plays sparingly, so he doesn't
Mhm.
really have time to work himself into the team. His best
Right.
position there is out wide on the right side, and we have a guy for that. Or well,
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 hopefully we continue to have a guy for that. Yeah.
yeah, that we'll deal with that in the second game. But yeah,
Right.
um, yeah, it's frustrating, of course, because then when he finally comes on, so much of the attention is going to be on him, and you notice a lot like with Jesus, right? You notice all those times where he does something, you're like, ah, but you
Mhm.
can't.
Mhm.
You got to be willing to work. You got to be, yeah, we're not in a position where we can just sort of let him work through it because, of course, it is very important to us to get results, both in this competition and all of our competitions.
Yeah. So the first goal of the match occurred in the fourth minute from Crystal Palace. Mateta, who he was kind of a thorn in our sides a few times this week. He seems like a pretty good player. And this goal was familiar. We had something similar happen last week, I think, where Kivior was just not fast enough to chase somebody down, and they end up getting a goal because
Yeah,
of it.
I was less bothered by the speed on that one.
Hmm.
Because Kivier's a central defender, and of course we see Gabriel, we see Saliba, who certainly have wheels. I'm less bothered by the speed and more just I thought he was a bit physical off the ball, like, or at least physical away, and should could have done a little more. Right, you want him to do a little bit more in terms of throwing the attacker off. And again, this is another one of those that I feel like Raya could have done a little better with that
Hmm.
one. We talked about this a little bit, right? Shot stopping is not necessarily his forte, especially compared to a guy like Ramsdale, who is a much better shot stopper. But he does so many other things, and you think about for Arsenal, we don't give up a lot of shots. Arsenal dominates possession; they're pushing the ball forward, so they're not. So in a sense, shot stopping isn't maybe the most important skill they have.
Hmm.
But it's, yeah, in those moments it gets a little frustrating when that happens, and you do want to feel a little bit like, could have done better with that. Having said that, I thought Raya actually had two pretty solid games this week, but that was a tough moment.
It was. I mean, I tend to be forgiving when you're in a 1v1 like that. It's like the odds are so heavily favoring the striker at
Hmm.
that point. Like it is much, much easier to get around the keeper than to stop the attack. I mean, it happens and you see it, and it's amazing when you do. It seems pretty rare. Like I kind of I give him a little bit of a pass, I guess, on that one. But yeah.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but in that circumstance, like knowing you're the guy in Kivior's case, you can't let that happen. That's as a
Yeah.
defender, right? That's kind of your position, your job, right? Is to prevent those opportunities. And so he's going to feel. I mean, I don't want to turn this into like taking shots at Kivior. He's a good player. He's the third. He's our third choice center back behind Gabriel and Saliba, and we
Hmm.
need to rotate them around. And generally, he's been okay. Um, you know, let's just say we can get away with that against Palace because we can score 8 goals in 2 games. That's one you kind of want to be a little. You have him play the Palace games so that he doesn't have to play when it's Spurs or Liverpool
Hmm.
or Chelsea.
Well, that makes sense. um, but yeah, I mean the rest of the first half, we were just chasing and not quite converting anything, having some chances but not great ones, and just it felt like they just kind of didn't know how to break them down, and then we had some halftime substitutions.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in some of the previous weeks, right? About dominating possession, but not turning it into opportunities, but not turning the opportunities into goals. But we were a little loose. We weren't generating the good kinds of opportunities. I mean, how many shots did you see that kind of rolled harmlessly to the keeper and he sort of picks
Hmm.
up or didn't even get there?
Hmm.
But then you make the subs at halftime. Saliba comes on, Odegaard comes on, and I mean, we've talked about Martin Odegaard how many times. Martin Odegaard's pretty special, and
Hmm. Hmm.
with him on, we added another gear to the attack, and you saw them pushing forward, getting better opportunities, and then eventually gets to Jesus, who did not miss that time.
No. So yeah, I mean, and yeah, absolutely. Like that pass from Odegaard was so amazing. I just noticed it. I was gonna mark down the pass even before seeing that it resulted in a goal, because just the way that he passed it to Jesus, but in between, it was at least three or four defenders that he just like threaded the needle between. It
Mhm.
was such an amazing pass, just spot on. And yeah, then Jesus finally got his goal.
Yeah, and then he
And then
got
we were
another one.
back in it, yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. So then a few minutes later, Nketiah was subbed in. That was interesting seeing him playing again. And I mean, I don't know how you felt about it. I felt he was doing a good job for Crystal Palace. It seems like he's one of their stronger players. Like when he was on, he was doing a pretty good job.
He was okay. He's going to relish the opportunity to score against his former club like that,
Mhm.
and certainly appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, we like Eddie. Um, but he, as I understand, he hasn't gotten a lot of run with Palace. So like,
Okay.
yeah, he was bright, he was lively. The game was pretty loose. Both these games were loose, which was a nice loose in the sense that it felt like there was a lot of movement, a lot of pushing back and forth. Definitely a change of pace, for example, from like Everton, where we saw Everton basically sitting 10 guys into the box and daring us to break them down, and we couldn't.
Mhm.
Palace was not going to play that way. They were pressing much higher up the field. They were pressing us, and with some of our rotation, we weren't as solid, especially in the midfield. This is especially true at the second game, which we'll talk about in a bit. But even in this game, too, we had some moments where we were a little uncertain, where they were able to get a little bit more pressure in there, and it was a good finish from Nketiah. Let's give credit where it's due. It was a really nice goal.
Yeah.
Um,
Like, I don't remember seeing a header like that before. I mean, most of the time, the ball comes in and you're either standing or leaping and just basically trying to position your head for the ball to bounce off
mhm,
of it kind of inertly, right? Where your
yeah,
head isn't doing much other than being a surface at
oh yeah,
position at the right angle, right? That header of his, he aimed his head at the goal and
yeah,
just like shot it like it
hmm,
was like when you pull back the stopper on a pinball machine, you go boom, bang,
yep.
and it was like that. It was really something.
It was a good finish, and it did make the end of the game a little bit nervy. Although I have to say,
Hmm.
I wasn't. I don't. I mean, obviously, this is easy to say, not just after the game is over, but now several days after the fact. I wasn't super nervous on that one. I felt like we were in pretty good control overall. I mean, yeah, there's a possibility when it's a 1 goal difference something could go horribly wrong, but I thought overall we handled the situation really well and we sort of saw out the rest of the game as it was.
Oh yeah, and it also helps a lot that instead of it going in a different order where he brought it level to 2-2, it was bringing from 3-1 to 3-2, which
Mhm.
we still had the margin and it was close enough to the end of the match that yeah, I felt pretty confident we could ride it out, but you
Mhm.
know, it was yeah, it was a little nervy, but um and yeah, so what did you think of Miles Lewis Skelly getting the yellow card for delaying the restart? He was like holding the ball on the ground after he like went to ground beyond the touchline. Like, was he? Do you think he was delaying the restart? Like, it wasn't
I mean,
clear
I
to
think
me.
that's one of those. Again, anytime you see the ball in a player's hands like that, you're kind of taking your chances. I mean, I know
Yeah,
we're a little more sensitive to that because, well, because, but I didn't have a huge problem with that card. And we can talk a little bit about the cards in the second game. But yeah, at that stage of the game and the competition, I get it. I mean, you are trying to waste, when you're in stoppage time up 1 goal, you are trying to waste time. Like that's not an
yeah.
unusual thing to think about. Um,
It was also I'm not seeing it in my notes, but it was in one of these matches. Um, Lewis Skelly was doing a throw in, and he seems to be someone who we have throw it in a lot when he's playing. Where he throws it in, then the ref blows the whistle and says, "Nope, sorry." And probably he didn't have 2 feet on the ground is the most likely thing that happened. But that's the second time I remember seeing that happen to him. It happened another time a week or two ago, and it just like I don't see that really happening to other Premier League players. Obviously, it's a routine thing at my under 8
yeah,
games, right? Like they're still very much learning how to throw the ball. He should know.
it reminds me. There was a couple of years ago, was a player Hector Bellerin who just could not stop committing foul throws. Like
Oh yeah.
it was just like it almost felt like they just called it because Hector Bellerin was throwing in the ball and it must have been a foul. Like it was just so. Like, how do you keep doing? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
How does that keep happening?
It's
Yeah, I
a
mean,
pretty
Arsenal
simple
tends to have
idea.
their wide players. It's like tend to have the wide players do it. So it's the full backs that'll take the throws, or the
Mhm.
outs, or the wingers will take the throws. So
I didn't
that's
actually note that specifically before, but that makes sense because you throw it in and you're already close to the position that you need to return to.
right. The only
So,
time I feel like I've seen Thomas Partey go out a few times for what look like the long throws. If you're
okay.
deep enough in the opposition end, they'll sometimes treat the throw
Yeah.
in almost like a
Almost
free kick where you're do the long
right.
throw. You just try to hoof it into the box.
And that's more of a specialized skill being able to throw it accurately that far over your head. Yeah.
Or even just to throw it that far. Period. Remember
Yeah.
these. Remember they don't work out these muscles in the sport
They're
that
all leg
much.
day. Yeah.
Every day is leg day when you're a soccer player.
Yep. But no, so we ended up pulling out the 3-2 result. It was good. It was a refreshing victory. It's the only time I've seen us advance. I mean, how far have I seen us go in the Carabao Cup before? I don't think we've ever even made it to round of 16 the past
No,
couple
no,
of
no,
years,
no,
have we? We
no,
got
no.
eliminated like in the first untelevised match a couple of years ago, and then it was like the first televised match
The
like
second,
last year or
yeah.
something, the second one.
Well, it wasn't the second round because we start in like the third. But yeah, we this
Well,
is
for us,
yeah.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
the quarterfinals is the furthest you've seen. I have seen us play in 3 League Cup finals, all rather embarrassing losses. We can talk about that if we actually go to the final again.
yeah.
But yes, I've seen this in 3 League Cup finals. None of which we have not. We've the last time we won the competition I think was 1993.
Oh boy,
Like it's not. We have like 2 League Cups. It's not a competition we've typically
yeah.
done. It's that we have any real success. Not like the FA Cup.
Uh huh. But yeah, so before we leave this match, one question, and it's not really pertinent to the match itself, but it just came up during the commentary of the match. But the one commentator had mentioned something about playing for Welling, which I imagine is a team. It sounds like it would be, and that he played in Welling in the non-league pyramid,
Mm-hmm.
and I I don't know exactly what that means because aren't all of the leagues in the pyramid? Isn't that the point of the pyramid,
So the league in question here is the English Football League, who
right?
governs the top 4 leagues. So basically, it's
Oh,
the so we talk about there's basically officially there's 10 levels to the
yeah.
pyramid. There are a few more below it, but the top four are the EFL, and so this is the League Cup. It is only
Right.
contested amongst
Right.
the teams in the top four divisions. The FA Cup is an open invitational tournament,
Right.
so it is theoretically open and contested by every team in the pyramid has an opportunity
Right.
to win the trophy.
So from the fifth level down, you're in the non-league pyramid. You're
Right.
part of the pyramid, but you're not in the league.
In the
Okay.
league, exactly.
Okay.
So if you ever find yourself watching Welcome to Wrexham when they first took
Yeah.
over the club, Wrexham is in the fifth division, the National League. They talk about how they're trying to get into the football league, into the fourth
Right.
division, which they do.
Yeah.
At the end of the second season. Spoiler alert, sorry. But yeah, they do ultimately make it there. But that's the goal, is to get into that league. I mean, once you get into the fifth division, it's not entirely. I wouldn't quite call it semi-pro, but you're. I mean, it in the fourth level and above, they're all professional players.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can fully say that in the fifth division, and definitely you start getting into the sixth and the seventh. Yeah, now we're dealing with semi-pro. Until you get to the point of you get to below the 10th is the Sunday League. It's basically a bunch of dudes going out to play on Sundays.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
All right. Well, that brings us to yesterday's Premier League match against Crystal Palace. It's just such a funny thing. We need to differentiate which Crystal Palace match of the week we're talking about. But yeah, so we played them yesterday, the 21st. This is our 17th Premier League match of a season. So we're just a couple away now from the midway mark where we will have played every team once. I guess we still have Ipswich and one other that we haven't played yet this season.
Brentford.
Oh, okay. That makes
Brentford's
sense.
the other one.
Yeah, and but yeah, we trounced them. I mean, did 1-5 feel like a representative score to you?
It's weird to say it didn't. It didn't. So there's a little bit of rotation with the lineup again. Jesus got in, which makes sense. You score a hat trick, you're probably going to start the next game.
Yeah,
There he
against the
was
same team. Yeah,
against the well, even not against the same team.
no,
You
but
go
especially yeah,
yeah, the idea you go with a hot hand like that. It was interesting is
yeah,
they put Jesus in the middle, had Martinelli and Saka out wide, and they dropped Havertz back to the midfield. Party as a defensive midfielder with Odegaard. Um, it wasn't great. Let me rephrase that. It wasn't great defensively. Um, Party, I don't think has the same wheels he did when he joined Arsenal. I shouldn't say I don't think that. He definitely doesn't have the same wheels he did when he joined Arsenal. So his ability to cover ground is a bit compromised. And that's a lot harder for him to do with a guy like Kai Havertz, who's definitely more of a forward thinking midfield player. He's
hmm
pushing forward, going ahead as opposed to going to drop back and play defensively. I mean, he can make tackles. He's not incapable, but um, that's not really his role. And I thought the game, certainly in the first half, was really wide open. Um, which I'm of two minds about, right? Because on the one hand, it made for some real uncomfortable moments, like for example when they scored, um,
hmm
you know, and frankly a lapse. I mean, just almost shocking from Saliba.
yeah. Coming from him, yes, it was.
I mean, and look, these things will happen over the course of a long season. It's partly shocking because it's Saliba, but
Right.
yeah, that was really bad. And again, there were moments, especially in the first half, where they were putting it to us. Again, they didn't sit 10 behind the ball. They weren't begging us to come after them and soak up pressure and hope to, for a smash and grab draw or a win. They played up on us. There were a couple of occasions where they were pushing forward. I mean, they got Raya into a few really dicey situations.
hmm Yeah, definitely. I mean, I I noted one in the 21st minute as my notes in the 4th minute for the cup match said expletive like oh snap essentially when they scored that quickly on us, and my notes in the 21st minute here say he saved us from another oh snap moment in front of the goal.
Yeah, it was a little again, some uncomfortable moments, and a lot of that coming from our pressure they were putting on us, which is not a pressure we see that often. Even
hmm
against like City, we didn't really see a lot of that. And so
No, that's true.
I think that's kind of an interesting thing for us to be facing. But that one was a little weird, but overall I thought we handled them fairly well, and then started to press forward and were able to get two goals before the half.
Right.
Jesus had two, and then it was Yeah,
We
that
ended
one
up
kind of
with
bounded through, and it has Havertz who finished it off.
yeah, we ended up with 3 before the half. It was 1-3 at the half mark.
Right, yeah, 2 more, right? Because the
Right,
scored was
gotcha.
1-1, yeah, so it was
Yeah.
but you're right, yeah, so it's 3-1 at the half. It was just a weird one because it felt like we weren't playing particularly well, right? Especially defensively, but at
Mhm.
the same time, that kind of open game is part of what allowed us to score 3 goals.
Well, right. We do
Um
well in that situation. Yeah.
Right, and to take advantage of that,
Offensively.
and yeah, so
Yeah.
it's it, it I'm still not well, I shouldn't say I'm not sure how I feel about it because I loved it because we scored 5 goals. It was awesome. But there's a part of me, and you know what's driving Arteta great. Um, but overall, yeah, I mean, really, the only thing I'd really say about the rest of the first half, of course, is the injury to Bukayo Saka.
Yeah, that was bad. Any update yet? I mean, it was only yesterday that this happened
Yeah, it
as we
was
record,
hamstring.
but right.
You could see him clutching his hamstring as he went down. Apparently, they said it's the same one that he had injured earlier in the season. We missed a couple of games, which isn't
Okay.
terribly surprising.
Yeah.
Um, and they did say he was seen leaving the stadium on crutches, which
Okay.
is not
Well,
good. Again, we don't
no,
know. Arteta's not
but
going to
could
say
also be
anything.
preventative just to make sure he doesn't do anything to injure it further. But yeah,
Yeah, and we also know Arteta's not going to say anything
no.
really. It'll be curious to see. I let's put it this way: I would be surprised if we saw him certainly for Ipswich this weekend or the coming week.
Yeah.
But we'll see. It's 5 days. It's Christmas. You put your feet up for a bit.
Hmm.
Maybe that helps it get back. But hamstrings are tricky. It's probably going to be a couple weeks. And what we saw, and we can talk about more about this a little bit later. I thought it was really interesting that they ended up. They kept Jesus in the middle, and they switched sides. Martinelli went out to the right side, and they brought
Right.
on Trossard for the left. I guess kind of makes sense. The only other thing I think you might do, based on our personnel at that point, would have been put Havertz back up in the center, and you can push Jesus out wide on the right side because he
Yeah.
can play wide.
Yeah.
Um, but actually, I have to say, I thought we were really effective that way. That was a change that I thought did a lot for us. And then we'd also throw in some of the second half substitutions. In particular, I'd say the arrival of Declan Rice.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Martinelli had 2 goal contributions only after making that switch.
Hmm.
He had a cross to Jesus, which ended up, with that one that Havertz got the final tap on. Jesus almost got his third and didn't quite. He needed a little assistance from Havertz to finish it. That was Martinelli made that initial cross, and then it was also Martinelli who tapped in the rebound in the second half too. So I think, yeah, I agree. He did a good job on that right side. That's interesting. I don't know if I remember seeing him at least once before on that, but it's not common. And who
Right.
knows if we'll see
Yeah.
it more.
Well, partly because we have Saka, and why would you play anybody
Well,
else out
right.
there when you have Saka? I do, but yeah, it was an interesting one. Obviously, because he's right-footed, he gives us something a little bit different. Like we see, Saka's instinct is always to cut inside, whereas Martinelli doesn't even have to make the cut because of his body position. He can just swing the cross in if he wants to do
Right.
that, which does give us a slightly different dimension there. And again, how much of this is confidence? Like we talked about with Jesus. Now he's got a
Hmm.
goal. Now I say he's got 5 goals in an hour under his belt.
Well, yeah.
All of a sudden, is he a guy who can maybe kick on for us a little bit? Same with Martinelli if he gets a few of these good plays in, because we talked about, right. Maybe this was some of the talk I know leading up into Saturday's game. Yeah, Jesus should probably start because he scored the hat trick, keep his confidence going. Or maybe he should just start on the left because Martinelli and Trossard haven't been good enough. I mean,
Yeah.
there's an argument to be made that you could just with that. Um,
Yeah.
and this was another one, in terms of options. We didn't have Raheem Sterling. They said he picked up a knock before the game, and so
Oh,
he
I
was
missed that.
he was
Okay.
unavailable. He's a guy who you would think might actually play on that out wide position on the right, but wasn't
Yeah.
available. So
Interesting. One other minor injury because he didn't come off the pitch, but I didn't know if you've heard anything about this since then. But I kind of took a small gasp when I saw Gabriel take a hard shot to the head. He used his head to stop a goal attempt, and given that he missed some play
hmm
time in the last couple weeks after not a head-to-head blow,
yeah,
I was nervous about that. Any word?
I hadn't heard anything. He came back on. He was
Right, he
off.
did. He
Yeah,
continued
he came
playing,
back
but
off and
but
played
he
out the rest of the
also
game.
when
So,
he had that head-to-head contact, I think he played the rest of that game too, and it wasn't until the next match that he didn't play after that, if I'm recalling correctly.
if I recall correctly, he was subbed off at halftime in that
Oh,
game
that could be.
because it was
Okay.
at the toward the end of the half and was subbed
Okay.
off. I think is
I
how
remember
that
he
one
didn't
went
come
down.
off immediately, so that could be.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I recall, he did come off
Yeah.
there. I mean, we'll see. Obviously, head injuries, concussions are weird. They're tricky things altogether. So you got to be
Well,
really
yeah,
careful with
and
that. But
re-injury is the biggest risk. I mean, I know this
yeah,
from my family's personal experience this past year with head injury.
but also they say with concussions, like it's in some cases it's not even in some cases it's the accumulation. They said you'd be amazed how many big hits you see and like everybody's fine, but then you get a little one, but something about that little and the way it gets you just kind of jars you in such a way that
Yeah.
that's what causes the concussion. They're even getting them is in some ways unpredictable.
Yeah. Well, no, absolutely. Getting them is unpredictable. It is situation by situation and person by person.
Hmm.
Two people in the same situation, one would and the other wouldn't. But
Right.
and it's also possible when I'm worried about re-injury that may be informed by my experience with a developing skull and brain
Yeah.
versus a developed one. Like Gabrielle, I think he's over 25, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but it is around 25 is when the brain is done developing. So it's like,
Mhm.
we have a fair number of players who, even though they're not my son's age, are still like in that kind of developmental brain
Mhm.
periods too. But yeah. um so yeah, we ended up so Declan Rice came on. This was like pretty early on in the second half, as well as Calafiore. It was good to see him back. And yeah, I mean, it was like right away that we had Rice contributing to a goal again. And then he scored his own 20 minutes later. So
Yeah, to me, Rice's addition in particular, and Calafiore's was a part of this as well. Though I thought Lewis Skelly had a fine game, but I think
mm,
but Rice, especially in Calafiore, helped as well defensively. I think obviously it was 3-1 at that point, and we were able to lock it down. It was a lot less. There was a lot less chaos in that game, and I think that speaks as well to the kind of the midfield issues that we were having and why Palace was able to generate so many opportunities. You replace Party, you push up, so you get somebody else pushing up forward in offensively, and so you have Rice there patrolling that midfield. I think that settled things down a lot.
hmm yeah, and then toward the end, Waneri came on and Marino came on. Just got a little run out with a few minutes left,
Mhm.
so nothing really came of that, but it was good.
But yeah, good finish. I mean, it's nothing, especially with the necessity of pumping up the goal difference, and obviously we're kind of looking ahead of ourselves on the table. City lost again,
Yeah,
which is just it's crazy how
it really
bad they've
is.
been. Chelsea also dropped points, which was nice to see.
Oh, okay.
Liverpool earlier today smashed Spurs, so
Oh, well,
but again,
good news,
that's
bad news.
yeah. I mean, but right. I mean, but you got to put yourself in that position. In this case, we were a bit fortunate. We were playing earlier. We played yesterday. Liverpool played today, and so for us to put a little pressure on them. Now, obviously, they responded, but it's
hmm
also Spurs. So what do you expect?
yeah. um, so a couple questions regarding this match. So one thing is I noticed the Arsenal players were wearing their black mourning bands on the one arm. Do you know who that was for? I didn't catch it on the
Yes,
broadcast.
that was from a former an Arsenal man from the '60s, George Eastham, who
Okay.
passed away on the 20th. So he was 88. So that's
Okay.
a career with Arsenal.
Yeah.
Um, and so obviously, it's always a little sadder around the holidays, even for a man in his 80s. You certainly understand it, but
Sure.
good to remember the Arsenal players of the past.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is I noticed, especially in the second match, I didn't really pay attention to it too much in the first match, but Miles Lewis Skelly was really getting knocked around a lot. And like, as an example that stood out to me is they were in the prep phase of a corner kick. And I don't even remember whose corner it was, but he was like getting a forearm pressed up against his throat. And the ref came in and he was like indicating that he was like having trouble breathing with the way that this guy was pushing on him. And there was like, overall, there weren't a lot of fouls called in the Premier League match yesterday. Um, but the ones that were very often against committed against Lewis Scully.
Mm.
Do you know why it is he seems like such a magnet for that kind of physical abuse?
Well, part of it is he has the ball. I mean, right? You don't foul players off the ball. You foul
Right.
them because they have the ball. So like we've talked about with Saka, he takes a lot of physical punishment in part
Right.
because he has the ball. They're trying to get it. Some of that is also, I know exactly the player you're talking about with that kind of wrestling match. I forget. I can picture him, but I can't remember who the Palace player was. The guy was a foot taller than him.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, there's a
yeah.
bit of the oddity of trying and respect to Lewis Skelly, who wasn't getting pushed around against someone who was much bigger. And again, he's 18.
Right.
So he's in some ways still they're gonna be able to physically jostle him around a little bit. It's partly what makes Wanyeri so impressive as you look at him, and I mean he's 18, but he's a freaking unit. I mean, like
Yeah.
he's a muscular young man. Lewis Skelly isn't quite there yet. Again, relatively speaking, he is
Right.
obviously in excellent physical condition.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that well, I didn't see him as I think what's more impressive is he's not actually getting manhandled a great deal. That
Yeah.
at 18 he's holding his own in a professional league against men, which is
Sure.
not it's a very difficult thing to do.
Oh, yeah. Um, a little bit of a weird one. At multiple times throughout this match, they would show, or I should specify the second match, they would show the Crystal Palace dugout. So this is their home dugout. And I kept on seeing, I could have sworn to you that it was Matt Turner, which makes no sense, right? He used to be with us. He's not anymore. He's currently with Nottingham Forest, not Crystal Palace, as far as I'm aware. Um, that wasn't him, was it?
It was in fact. He is
It
actually
was
on
him?
loan. He is on loan to Crystal Palace this season.
I completely forgot that. When did that
Yep.
happen? Has
In
that been the
August.
whole season?
The start. Yeah, apparently he's been with them all season.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
you saw the reason you saw Matt Turner in the dugout is because Matt Turner is in the dugout for he plays for Palace now. He's their backup.
yeah,
I don't think he's getting a lot of time with them either.
yeah,
But
yeah. Okay.
um,
That's funny because they would show him and they never mentioned that it was him. So I was like, that's him, I think. But okay.
there were a couple of former Palace players who got some face time in the stands. They're playing for other clubs who are on break now.
Right, and they talked about them. The commentators mentioned why the camera was
Mhm.
lingering on this seemingly random guy. But yeah, one other kind of funny thing that I answered for myself after the match was over, but I always just it's interesting to me to see what sideboard ads come up and how they vary between different clubs and different competitions. Like we've talked about how the Champions League controls tightly like all the advertising that's shown on screen during their matches. Like for instance, this match I saw Sonic 3 being advertised, which I don't remember seeing a major motion picture being advertised on the sideboards before, but I guess the red and the blue color scheme of the movie, I guess, meshed well with Palace's color scheme. I don't know why, but by the way, while we're talking about Crystal Palace's color scheme, what do you think of their home kits? Because I thought they were awful. I hate the pattern, like the paisley-ish pattern behind the red and the blue. I did not like it.
I mean, they're traditionally the red and blue stripes.
Right.
It's
But it's the texture inside the red and the
yeah.
blue, like I did not like this season.
I mean, yeah, it's not great. I mean, you're rolling with a similar design. We talked about this with Arsenal, right? I mean, there's only so much you can do. I mean, there's a lot you can do with a red because you like the sublimated patterns. Chelsea does a
Yeah.
lot of this with the
Yeah.
sublimated patterns. Well, Arsenal's had a few over the years, even if it's base red with white sleeves. When you're rolling with stripes, that really limits you a lot
That's true.
in a lot
Yeah.
of different ways. And so I respect the idea of trying something different, but overall, yeah, it's not. It's probably not. I not that I have
Yeah.
a list of favorite Palace looks, but I'm pretty sure that's not on it. If such a list existed.
So meanwhile, tracking back to the sideboard ad. So at one point, I saw ads directing you to a URL enjoyillinois.co.uk. And I looked at that and I'm thinking, wait a second, okay. That is the same name as the state where I was born, in fact. And I know there's a lot of places in the United States that are named after places in England. And sometimes it's surprising, especially if it's a place that maybe doesn't have new before the name. It might be a little surprising to discover sometimes, but it works out that way. And I start questioning myself, like, wait, is there an Illinois, England? I thought that Illinois had something to do with like Indian names for something. Like I know Chicago was named after an Indian tribe name or something, and a lot of stuff in that area it does have roots in very American things. And I looked it up, and yeah, the name Illinois does it's comes through French, which is how you end up with like a silent S on the end. But yeah, so I went to the link, and no, there is no Illinois, England. It's just the United State of Illinois looking for tourism, and I guess people in England are more likely to visit a .co.uk URL than a .com one or something. But
I mean, yeah, I mean, I you would know better than I how URLs work necessarily, but I mean, listen, we're running around with the shirts that say "Visit Rwanda" on them. I mean, the
yeah,
idea of
exactly. Yeah,
advertising for the state of Illinois. I mean, I did go to the site, and they're right. Chicago is, Chicago is a big tourist attraction. And
yeah,
apparently, Illinois has more roadside attractions than anywhere else in America, which okay. Um, is very Americana to be, I
yep.
say, I hope, yeah, I hope a few people from the south of London saw the ad and it's like, you're right, we could do a road trip in Illinois, and they came to the U.S. and rented a car and drove on the correct side of the road and made their way around the great
Yeah.
state of Illinois.
Yeah, so it's just kind of funny. Uh, so who's your player of this Crystal Palace focused week?
I could be coy about this and dance around it and talk about different players' strengths. Gabriel Jesus scored 5 goals, man. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
other choice here. He scored 5 goals. He was buzzing around the whole time. In a week where we scored 8 goals, he had over half of them.
Hmm.
Um, Eddie Nketiah had a hat trick last year, so him scoring a hat trick does not necessarily mean he's about to kick on and run us in. But if Gabriel Jesus gets going, you know, I know I've made fun of my Forest pick for being the weakest in terms of my preseason predictions. Gabriel Jesus as the leading scorer is not looking very good. However, he
And it's
now
still
has
half
five,
the season left.
and he now has 5 goals, which is shockingly high on our list. But that's fine. Yeah, he scored 5 goals. He's the player of the week. This isn't hard. Come on.
No, and I don't disagree with you at all. In isolation, where I'm picking the player of the week, it is very clear. However, I have thoughts about what we talk about on the show, and I try to give attention to somebody else also. So when there is a very clear one, clearly it should be Jesus. However, if we were to pick a second person who I wanted to talk about, one person I wanted to talk about was Timber. We didn't really talk about him much this episode, but I've been noticing a lot of quality from him. We saw a lot of him and Lewis Skelly over these couple matches, and in contrasting them, and they play different roles, and I realize that, but in contrasting them, I would say Lewis Skelly is good for his age. A lot of his quality is kind of relative to, like, he is so young and so good for that age and good overall, but largely in that context. Whereas Timber is just amazing me all the time with just subtle things that he does on and off the ball that really, really help the team a lot. And I've been noticing that more, but I'm not picking him, um, even though I'm inclined to. I'm actually going for whose jersey I am wearing today. I think Raya. I haven't picked him in a while. I think this is a good week. I think the saves that he made overshadow the ones that he didn't this week. I think in particular he had another really nice double save where
Yeah.
he bounced it, scrambled to get back up, and then not only made the second save but actually caught it in a aerial dive, which was really cool to see. And I think that alone probably in my mind would have made me lean toward picking him. But just overall, he came through in some really, really key moments over these two matches where had he not been up to the task, and I think more than the average amount was being asked of him, I think he did have to rise to those occasions on some particular saves. I think it could have really made a difference, and especially the first match where the margin was a little bit closer. So
I think Raya isn't a bad. I thought, as I said, I think I said earlier, he did have a pretty good week overall. I mean, I know we're nitpicking on some of the goals that were, particularly that first goal that was conceded. But yeah, overall, and we didn't even mention the double save, which is another nice double save. He had
yeah.
another one, I think, on a breakaway. House was able to pull off a breakaway, and he made a save. I mean, again, could the striker have done a little better with the shot? Yeah, but
Mhm.
Raya kind of forced that play as well. So credit to him for that. No, I think Raya
Yeah.
is not a bad shout. I just 5 goals,
Yeah.
man.
I know. I mean, I do not disagree with you at all. It is really more of a technical decision,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
based
yeah.
on the merits. um, one quick segment I want to try and introduce into the show, and it will be quick. We are running long, but I want to try as I can to impart some knowledge on the game, some tips on the game for coaches, for players, things that I pick up. We had a short a couple weeks ago that was talking about mid-range passing technique. If that's something that you're interested in, seek that out. That isn't something that we covered on the show proper. What I wanted to mention this week, it's kind of a general thing that applies to any outfield player at any level, and it seems really obvious once you hear it stated out loud, but I don't think it is obvious to everybody, and it's certainly not at the younger levels, which is when the ball is on its way to you, you should know what you are going to do with it when you get it. Don't wait and get the ball and look around and then decide. Whenever possible, when it's not a surprise. Like, obviously sometimes you poke the ball away from somebody and you're surprised to get it, and you do what you can. But when you are receiving a planned pass, like when you're receiving a pass from a teammate, know what you're going to do. And it makes sense in light of seeing like how Arsenal plays, which is obviously light years beyond the youth rec that I see. But it makes sense now how they're able to get these like one touch ping ponging passes all over the field. It's because when they get the ball, they already know who they're passing it to, where he is on the field. It's not omniscience and just knowing where everybody is. They already were looking when the ball was on its way. They know where they want it to go afterwards. So they make sure that they're able to secure the pass into the open space near their feet where they're able to keep the ball from getting kicked away, and they immediately action. And sometimes it's dribbling, but very often it's who you want to pass it to when you get it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And and especially at the professional level, a lot of that's born out of just practice and repetition and knowing and trusting the teammates. We've talked about how they suffer a little bit when you start to see lineup rotation. Well, that's because you don't know those guys. You don't
right.
trust them. We've talked about how that looks in the international game, right? It should be great. All these great players all playing together in the same team. Well, they've never played together, so they're kind of
Hmm.
losing a little bit. And theoretically lesser talented national team. The U.S. did this for years. Less talented national teams, but full of guys who played together a lot, were able to have, as I say, punch above their weight. And again, a
Right.
lot of that's, but you're absolutely right. And it's an interesting trick too when you watch a game. Obviously, your perspective is from the TV is different, but in a sense, what they tell you is don't watch the ball because that's everyone's instinct, right? Follow the ball, follow the ball, follow the ball. Don't watch the ball. Watch the movement of all the players around, and you get to a point where you can actually predict where the passes are going to go.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. You see which one makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's yeah, something that is helpful. Yeah, and as you point out, even to spectators, maybe not even just players or
Mhm.
coaches. So, what is coming up for next week?
Right, just one game this week. It is Boxing Day, and yet not Boxing Day. We're going to on Friday the 27th.
Hmm.
Arsenal will be playing Ipswich Town. The Fighting Ed Sheerans come to the Emirates. Um, So that'll be fun. Or you can go with their other nickname, the Tractor Boys. But they're going to be our first meeting with Ipswich in a while. Actually, we haven't played them in a long time. So that'll be fun. It'll be nice to see a new team here and there, and uh, hopefully hopefully it's 3 more points. Hopefully it's a bunch of goals, and hopefully we
Yeah.
keep on keeping on, as they say.
Oh yeah. All right. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with a link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to subscribe to our show in your podcast player of choice, be that Apple, Spotify, or wherever you like to. We record the show using Zencaster. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talked about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
And a happy festive fixtures to all, and to all a good night.